Kate Wells arrived at Millbrook Public Library every morning at exactly 7:30 a.m., her sensible flats making barely a whisper against the worn wooden floors. At 39, she moved through the stacks with quiet efficiency, her auburn hair pulled back in the same practical bun she'd worn for 6 years. Behind wire-rimmed glasses, her green eyes held depths that most people never bothered to notice. To the residents of Millbrook, Connecticut, she was simply Kate, the librarian, who organized books and helped students with research. They saw her faded cardigans, her careful budgeting at the grocery store, her solitary lunches eaten while reading technical journals that seemed oddly advanced for someone who spent her days checking out romance novels and children's picture books. What they didn't know was that Kate Wells had once been Dr. Kate Elena Wells, the youngest woman ever to win the American Institute of Architects Gold Medal. Her sustainable design innovations had graced magazine covers and conference keynotes. Her buildings had redefined urban planning concepts and earned international recognition. That was before the collapse, before Robert Blackwood's betrayal, before the headlines that branded her a failure and drove her into exile. The morning routine never varied. Kate unlocked the library's heavy oak doors, disabled the security system, and began her methodical preparation for another day of invisible service. She arranged the returned books on her cart, checked the weather for any issues with the building's aging systems, and reviewed the day's schedule of community programs. Millbrook Public Library was a Carnegie building from 1902, its brick facade and tall windows speaking to an era when libraries were temples of knowledge. Kate had spent 6 years learning every crack in its foundation, every quirk of its heating system, every structural stress point that needed monitoring. The building spoke to her in ways that no one else could hear. As she shelved books in the architecture section, her fingers lingered on titles she'd once authored. Sustainable Urban Design in the 21st Century by Dr. C.E. Wells sat spine out among the other technical volumes, its pages unturned for months. She'd written it in her previous life, when her future seemed limitless and her reputation unshakable. The first patron arrived at 9 a.m. sharp. Mrs. Henderson, a retired school teacher who came daily to read newspapers and work on crossword puzzles. She greeted Kate with the kind of polite friendliness reserved for service workers, warm but distant, acknowledging presence without seeing the person. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Henderson said, settling into her usual chair near the periodicals. "Terrible weather we're having. I do hope the town meeting tonight won't be too contentious." Kate nodded, continuing her shelving duties. She'd heard whispers about tonight's meeting for weeks. Something about a major development project coming to Millbrook. New buildings, new opportunities, new tax revenue for a town that had been slowly declining for decades. Throughout the morning, other regulars filtered in. High school students researching papers, young mothers with toddlers attending story time, elderly residents using the free internet. Kate helped them all with the same quiet competence, never drawing attention to herself, never revealing that she understood far more about their questions than they realized. At 11 a.m., a commotion outside drew everyone's attention to the tall windows facing Main Street. A convoy of black SUVs and construction vehicles had pulled up to the vacant lot across from the library. Men in expensive suits emerged, along with workers carrying surveying equipment and architectural plans. "Well, I'll be," muttered Mr. Patterson, the library's part-time volunteer. "Looks like those big city developers are finally here." Kate felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. Something about the lead figure, tall, silver-haired, moving with the confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding attention, triggered recognition she'd tried to bury for 6 years. Robert Blackwood stepped out of the lead SUV, consulting his phone while his associates began unrolling plans on the hood of their vehicle. Even at a distance, Kate could see his practiced smile, the way he gestured expansively while explaining something to the gathered crowd that was beginning to form. Her hands trembled as she continued shelving, muscle memory taking over while her mind reeled. Of all the small towns in New England, of all the development projects in the country, Robert Blackwood had found his way to Millbrook. The man who had destroyed her career, who had built his empire on her ruined reputation, was standing 50 yards away from her sanctuary. Kate forced herself to breathe normally, to maintain the composed facade that had become second nature. 6 years of hiding had taught her self-control, but seeing Blackwood again brought back the fury and helplessness she'd worked so hard to overcome. During her lunch break, she walked carefully past the development site, keeping her head down but her ears open. The local newspaper editor was interviewing Blackwood, his recorder capturing every word about the transformative project that would bring Millbrook into the modern era. "We're planning a complete revitalization," Blackwood was saying, his voice carrying the smooth confidence that had once charmed investors and city planning committees. "A new community center, mixed-use residential and retail space, sustainable design that will serve as a model for similar communities across New England." The irony wasn't lost on Kate. Blackwood was using all the buzzwords she'd pioneered, claiming credit for innovations he'd stolen from her work. But something in his presentation bothered her beyond personal resentment. The way he glossed over structural details, the vague responses to questions about environmental impact, the timeline that seemed impossibly aggressive for proper construction. That evening, the town hall was packed beyond capacity. Kate arrived early, claiming a seat in the back corner where she could observe without being noticed. She'd changed from her library cardigan into a dark sweater and jeans, hoping to blend into the crowd of curious residents. Mayor James Morrison called the meeting to order, his excitement barely contained as he introduced the team that's going to put Millbrook on the map. Blackwood took the podium with the commanding presence Kate remembered, his presentation polished and persuasive. The architectural renderings were impressive, sleek, modern buildings that would transform the town's aging infrastructure. The community center featured soaring glass facades and innovative energy systems. The residential units promised affordable housing with luxury amenities. The retail space would attract businesses that had previously overlooked Millbrook. But Kate's trained eye caught what others missed. The foundation specifications seemed inadequate for the proposed building heights. The environmental impact assessments glossed over potential drainage issues. The construction timeline required shortcuts that could compromise structural integrity. "Questions?" Blackwood asked, his smile confident as he surveyed the audience. Several residents asked about job opportunities, tax implications, and traffic concerns. Blackwood's answers were smooth and reassuring, but Kate noticed he deflected technical inquiries and avoided specific commitments about construction standards. Finally, she couldn't remain silent. Raising her hand, she stood slowly as Blackwood's gaze found her across the crowded room. "I have a question about the foundation systems," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite her racing heart. "The soil conditions in this area include significant clay deposits that expand and contract with moisture changes. How are you addressing potential settlement issues?" The room fell silent. Technical questions weren't common at town meetings, and Kate's detailed knowledge seemed to surprise everyone present. Blackwood's expression flickered, just for a moment, before his practiced smile returned. "That's a very sophisticated question," he said, his tone slightly condescending. "I can assure you that our engineering team has conducted thorough geological surveys and designed appropriate foundation systems. Perhaps we could discuss the technical details privately after the meeting." Kate felt the dismissal like a physical blow. The same patronizing tone, the same assumption that she couldn't possibly understand complex engineering concepts. But this time, She had too much at stake to retreat. "I'd prefer to hear the answer now," she pressed. "If these buildings are going to serve our community for decades, shouldn't the residents understand the basic structural approaches being used?" Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some residents nodded agreement, while others seemed impatient with the technical discussion. Blackwood's smile became more forced as he launched into a vague explanation about industry standard practices and cutting-edge engineering solutions. Kate listened with growing alarm. His answer revealed either dangerous ignorance or deliberate obfuscation of serious structural concerns. Either way, the people of Millbrook were being sold a project that could endanger their safety and their financial investment. After the meeting, she lingered in the parking lot, watching as residents approached Blackwood with congratulations and excited questions. His team packed their presentation materials with efficient professionalism, already moving on to the next phase of their campaign. As the crowd dispersed, Kate found herself face to face with Tom Bradley, the town's building inspector, a man in his 50s whose weathered hands spoke of decades in construction. "That was some question you asked in there," Bradley said, studying her with curious respect. "You know something about building design?" "I read a lot," Kate replied carefully. "Working in the library, you pick up information about all sorts of subjects." Bradley nodded slowly. "Well, I appreciate residents who pay attention to details. This project's moving fast, maybe too fast. We'll need all the oversight we can get to make sure everything's done right." As she drove home to her small apartment above the downtown bakery, Kate wrestled with impossible choices. Exposing Blackwood's corner cutting would require revealing her own expertise, and revealing her expertise would destroy the anonymity she'd spent 6 years building. But the faces of her neighbors haunted her. Mrs. Henderson with her modest pension, the young families scraping together down payments for homes in the new development, the teenagers who would spend their days in the community center Blackwood was planning to build with potentially dangerous structural compromises. In her apartment, surrounded by the technical journals and architectural texts she couldn't quite abandon, Kate stared at her reflection in the darkened window. The woman looking back bore little resemblance to the confident architect who had once commanded respect in boardrooms across the country. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as Blackwood's team began their detailed planning phase. Kate would return to her quiet work at the library, stamping books and helping patrons, while the man who had destroyed her career shaped the future of her adopted home. But for the first time in 6 years, she felt the stirring of something she'd thought permanently buried. The fierce protective instinct of an architect who understood that buildings weren't just structures, but vessels for human dreams and aspirations. The battle for Millbrook's future was about to begin, and Kate Wells was the only person in town with the knowledge to fight it. The question was whether she had the courage to emerge from the shadows and reclaim the expertise that had once defined her life. The next morning brought news that made Kate's coffee turn bitter in her mouth. The Millbrook Gazette's front page featured a large photograph of Robert Blackwood shaking hands with Mayor Morrison, accompanied by an article that painted the development project as the town's salvation. Kate read every word while standing behind the library's circulation desk, her trained eye catching details that would escape most readers. The construction timeline was even more aggressive than Blackwood had suggested at the town meeting, groundbreaking scheduled for November, with the community center expected to open by the following September. "Impossible," she muttered under her breath. Even with perfect weather and no complications, the schedule would require cutting corners that could prove disastrous. "What's impossible, dear?" Mrs. Henderson appeared at the desk with an armload of books to return. At lunch, she walked past the development site again. Blackwood's team had established a temporary office in a rented storefront, and through the windows she could see architectural plans spread across multiple tables. Her fingers itched to examine those drawings, to see what structural compromises were hidden beneath the attractive renderings. A commotion near the site's entrance caught her attention. Tom Bradley, the building inspector, was engaged in an animated discussion with one of Blackwood's engineers. Even from a distance, Kate could see the tension in their body language. "I'm telling you, the soil tests aren't adequate for this type of construction," Bradley was saying as Kate moved close enough to overhear. "We need additional bore samples, especially in the area planned for the community center." The engineer, a young man in an expensive suit who clearly viewed Bradley as a small-town obstacle, waved dismissively. "Our geological survey meets all state requirements. We can't delay the project for unnecessary additional testing." Bradley's face reddened. "Unnecessary? Son, I've been building in this area for 30 years. There's a reason most of the older buildings in town have deep foundations. The clay layer shifts, and if you don't account for it properly—" "Mr. Bradley," Blackwood's voice cut through the argument as he approached from the temporary office. "I understand your concerns, but we have teams of experts who've designed buildings across the country. Perhaps we could arrange for you to review our geological data in detail?" The offer sounded reasonable, but Kate caught the underlying message. Blackwood was smoothly redirecting Bradley's attention while avoiding any commitment to additional testing. It was a masterful display of the political maneuvering that had built his empire. That afternoon, Bradley appeared at the library, his usual confident demeanor replaced by obvious frustration. He approached the reference desk where Kate was helping a student with a research project. "Excuse me," he said after the student left. "You asked some good questions at the town meeting last night. I don't suppose you'd be willing to take a look at some technical documents?" Kate's pulse quickened. "What kind of documents?" "Geological surveys, foundation plans, that sort of thing. I've got a bad feeling about this project, but I need someone with a technical background to help me understand exactly what's wrong." The request hung between them like a challenge. Kate understood that accepting would mean stepping out of the shadows she'd inhabited for 6 years. But Bradley's weathered face showed genuine concern for his community, and she knew he was right to be worried. "I could take a look," she said carefully. "I mean, I might not understand everything, but I've read quite a bit about construction practices." That evening, Bradley spread Blackwood's plans across one of the library's large reading tables after closing time. Kate bent over the documents with growing alarm, her expert eye immediately identifying the problems that Bradley's instincts had detected. "Here," she said, pointing to a section of the foundation specifications. "These footings are designed for standard soil conditions, but the bore samples show clay concentrations that require much deeper pilings." Bradley nodded grimly. "That's what I thought, but I wanted confirmation. What about the drainage systems?" Kate flipped to the site engineering plans, her concern deepening. "They're not accounting for seasonal water table fluctuations. During spring runoff, this entire area could experience significant flooding. And look at this." She traced a line across the community center's floor plan. "They're planning to use standard concrete slabs over soil that will shift dramatically with moisture changes." "How bad could it get?" Bradley asked. Kate was quiet for a long moment, remembering another project where similar corners had been cut. Structural cracking within the first year. Foundation settlement that could make buildings uninhabitable. If the community center's gymnasium floor starts buckling during a school event. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Bradley's expression showed he understood the implications. "Can you document these problems?" he asked. "Write up something I can present to the mayor and town council?" "I don't know if my opinion would carry much weight," Kate said carefully. "I'm not a licensed engineer or architect. But you understand this stuff better than anyone else in town. Hell, you understand it better than half the people I work with in the construction industry." Kate felt the weight of decision pressing down on her. Documenting the problems would require using knowledge and analytical skills that might raise questions about her background. But remaining silent would make her complicit in a disaster that could devastate her adopted community. "I'll put together a report," she said finally. "But it might take a few days to research everything properly." Bradley smiled for the first time that evening. "Take all the time you need. This project isn't breaking ground for another few weeks." As they gathered the plans, Kate noticed something that made her blood run cold. Blackwood's signature appeared at the bottom of several documents, but it was the smaller text that caught her attention. Project manager and lead structural consultant signatures that belonged to the same team that had worked on the Brighton Harbor disaster 6 years ago. The building collapse that had destroyed her career hadn't been an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of cost-cutting and corner-cutting that Blackwood's organization had refined into a profitable business model. Now he was bringing those same practices to Millbrook, confident that a small town would lack the expertise to recognize the dangers. Over the next 3 days, Kate threw herself into researching every aspect of Blackwood's project. She arrived at the library early and stayed late, using her access to technical databases and professional journals to build an ironclad case against the proposed construction methods. The report she compiled was devastating. 23 pages of detailed analysis showing how Blackwood's cost-cutting measures would create multiple points of structural failure. Soil engineering that ignored known geological conditions. Drainage systems inadequate for the site's topography. Foundation designs that might survive a few years, but would inevitably fail under normal settling and weather stress. But as she prepared to give the report to Bradley, Kate realized she had made herself visible in a way that might attract Blackwood's attention. Her technical analysis was too sophisticated, too comprehensive for someone claiming to be a casual reader of construction literature. Friday morning brought confirmation of her fears. As she unlocked the library doors, she noticed a black sedan parked across the street, the same vehicle she'd seen in Blackwood's convoy earlier in the week. The windows were tinted, but she could feel eyes watching her as she went through her morning routine. Throughout the day, the sedan remained in position. During her lunch break, Kate varied her usual route, taking side streets and doubling back to confirm she wasn't imagining the surveillance. By afternoon, she was certain. Someone was keeping tabs on her movements. The message came during the library's busiest hour. A young man in a delivery uniform approached the circulation desk with an envelope marked "Personal and Confidential." Inside was a single sheet of expensive letterhead bearing Blackwood Development's logo. The message was brief and chilling. "Ms. Wells, or should I say, Dr. Kate Elena Wells, your interest in our Millbrook project has been noted. Perhaps we should discuss your concerns privately. I'll be in touch soon. R. Blackwood." Kate's hands trembled as she read the words. After 6 years of careful anonymity, her cover had been blown in a matter of days. Blackwood not only knew who she was, but was making it clear that he held all the cards. The afternoon dragged by in a haze of anxiety. Every patron who approached the desk, every phone call, every unfamiliar face made Kate wonder if Blackwood was making his next move. She found herself glancing repeatedly at the windows, checking for the black sedan that continued its patient vigil. As closing time approached, Kate realized she faced an impossible choice. She could disappear again, abandon Millbrook like she'd abandoned her career, and let Blackwood proceed with his dangerous project. Or she could stand and fight, knowing that doing so would expose her to the same character assassination that had destroyed her once before. The decision crystallized when she saw Tommy Henderson, Mrs. Henderson's grandson, skateboarding past the library with a group of friends. They were talking excitedly about the new community center, imagining the basketball courts and meeting rooms where they'd spend their teenage years. Kate thought about foundation walls cracking under settlement stress, about concrete slabs buckling during school dances, about the moment when Blackwood's cost-cutting would transform from financial fraud into human tragedy. She pulled out her phone and dialed Bradley's number. "Tom? It's Kate from the library. I've finished the technical report, but we need to talk. Something's happened that changes everything." That evening, as autumn darkness settled over Millbrook, Kate Wells prepared to step out of the shadows for the first time in 6 years. The battle for her community's future was about to begin, and this time she wouldn't retreat when the powerful tried to destroy the truth. But first, she had to survive whatever Robert Blackwood had planned for their private conversation. "Oh, nothing," Kate replied quickly, forcing a smile. "Just reading about the new development project." Mrs. Henderson's eyes lit up with excitement. "Isn't it wonderful? My grandson Tommy is supposed to start high school next year, and now he'll have that beautiful new community center for activities. Mr. Blackwood seems like such a capable man." Kate nodded non-committally while processing Mrs. Henderson's returns. Each cheerful comment from residents over the following hours added weight to her growing sense of responsibility. The people of Millbrook were investing their hopes and their futures in a project that might literally collapse around them. The knock came at 9 p.m., just as Kate was reviewing her technical report one final time. 3 sharp raps on her apartment door, confident and demanding. She looked through the peephole to see Robert Blackwood himself standing in the hallway, flanked by 2 men in dark suits who clearly weren't construction workers. Kate took a steadying breath before opening the door, keeping the security chain attached. "Mr. Blackwood, I wasn't expecting visitors this evening." His smile was the same one she remembered from conference rooms and courtrooms, charming on the surface but predatory underneath. "Kate, or may I call you Doctor? Wells? It's been far too long." "Ms. Wells will be fine," she replied coolly. "What can I do for you?" "I think you know why I'm here. May we come in? We have a great deal to discuss." Against every instinct screaming at her to keep the door closed, Kate released the chain and stepped aside. Blackwood entered her modest apartment with the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to getting his way, his associates positioning themselves near the door and window respectively. "Charming place," Blackwood commented, his gaze taking in the architectural textbooks that Kate had never quite managed to pack away. "Very minimalist. Quite a change from your corner office in Manhattan, I imagine." "I like the quiet," Kate replied, not offering seats or refreshments. "What do you want, Robert?" "Straight to business. I always appreciated that about you." He moved to her bookshelf, running a finger along the spines of technical journals. "You've been asking questions about my project. Detailed, sophisticated questions that suggest someone with considerable expertise in structural engineering." "I'm a concerned resident." "Indeed." Blackwood pulled one of her own books from the shelf, Sustainable Urban Design in the 21st Century, and flipped to the author photo on the back cover. Dr. Kate Elena Wells, youngest recipient of the AIA Gold Medal, pioneer in environmental architecture. Quite an impressive resume for a small-town librarian. Kate felt the familiar chill of exposure, but 6 years of hiding had taught her to control her reactions. That was a long time ago. Yes, the Brighton Harbor incident. Tragic, really. 3 people injured when that residential tower developed structural problems. The investigation concluded that your design specifications were inadequate. The words hit like physical blows, but Kate forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. The investigation was flawed. Was it? Blackwood closed the book with a soft thud. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you made critical errors in soil assessment and foundation design. Errors that cost people their homes and nearly cost lives." "You know exactly what happened at Brighton Harbor," Kate said quietly. You were the construction manager who substituted substandard materials and cut the foundation specifications to save costs. The building failed because you used grade B concrete instead of the grade A specified in my plans. Blackwood's smile widened. Prove it. The challenge hung in the air between them. They both knew the evidence had been buried under legal settlements and non-disclosure agreements. Blackwood's connections had ensured that his role remained hidden while Kate became the public scapegoat for the disaster. I notice you've been consulting with our local building inspector, Blackwood continued, settling into Kate's reading chair without invitation. Tom Bradley seems like a dedicated public servant, but perhaps out of his depth with modern construction techniques. I'd hate for him to delay progress based on uninformed concerns. His concerns are completely valid, Kate shot back. Your soil assessments are inadequate, your foundation designs are inappropriate for local conditions, and your construction timeline requires shortcuts that could be dangerous. According to whom? A disgraced architect working as a librarian? Blackwood's tone remained pleasant, but steel showed beneath the surface. I think the people of Millbrook would be more interested in hearing about your professional failures than your current opinions on construction standards. The threat was clear. Speak out against his project, and he would destroy her again, this time in front of people who had become her neighbors and friends. Kate thought about Mrs. Henderson, about the trust she'd built with the library patrons, about the quiet life she'd worked so hard to construct. What do you want? She asked. Simple. Stay quiet. Let me complete this project without interference. In return, I'll keep your colorful history private. The good people of Millbrook need never know they've been taking book recommendations from a professional failure. Kate felt the familiar surge of helpless rage that had consumed her 6 years ago. Blackwood was using the same tactics: character assassination, professional isolation, the destruction of everything she'd built. But this time was different. This time, innocent people would pay the price for her silence. And if I refuse? Blackwood gestured to one of his associates, who produced a tablet displaying what appeared to be a news article draft. The headline read, "Disgraced Architect Hiding in Small Town. Local Librarian's Dark Past Revealed." The story practically writes itself, Blackwood mused. Troubled professional seeks anonymity after career-ending scandal. Local residents shocked to discover they've been trusting someone with such a questionable background. I imagine the library board would have some serious questions about their hiring practices. Kate scanned the article, noting its carefully crafted blend of true facts and damaging implications. It wouldn't directly lie about her past, but it would present the Brighton Harbor disaster in the worst possible light, painting her as a reckless architect whose mistakes had endangered lives. You have 48 hours to decide, Blackwood said, standing to leave. Cooperate, and this story disappears forever. Continue your meddling, and every resident of Millbrook will know exactly who their helpful librarian really is. After they left, Kate sat in her violated apartment, staring at the book Blackwood had handled. Her hands shook as she opened it to the dedication page. To my father, who taught me that buildings should protect the people inside them, not the profits of those who build them. She thought about calling Bradley, warning him about Blackwood's threats. But what could she tell him? That a construction mogul was blackmailing a librarian to silence her concerns about building safety? Without revealing her professional background, her warnings would seem like paranoia. Kate walked to her window, looking down at Main Street where streetlights illuminated the construction site. In a few weeks, ground would be broken for buildings that might stand for decades, or might fail catastrophically when the first major storm tested their inadequate foundations. She pulled out her laptop and began researching Blackwood's recent projects, using her access to professional databases that still recognized her credentials. What she found made her blood run cold. 3 projects in the past 5 years had experienced significant structural problems within 2 years of completion. A shopping center in Ohio had required emergency evacuation when floor joists began failing. An apartment complex in Virginia had been condemned after foundation settlement caused dangerous wall cracks. In each case, Blackwood's company had settled quietly out of court, using non-disclosure agreements to prevent public scrutiny. The pattern was clear: cut costs during construction, profit from the reduced expenses, then rely on legal settlements to handle any problems that emerged later. But Millbrook was different. This wasn't a commercial project where financial losses could be absorbed by insurance companies. The community center would be filled with children. The residential units would house families who had invested their life savings in what they believed was solid construction. Kate opened a new document and began typing. If Blackwood wanted to destroy her reputation again, she would give him a fight worth having. The technical report she'd prepared for Bradley was comprehensive, but now she would create something more: a complete forensic analysis of Blackwood's corner-cutting practices, documented with evidence from his previous projects. Working through the night, she compiled a devastating case against not just the Millbrook project, but Blackwood's entire business model. Financial records showing his profit margins, timeline comparisons revealing impossible construction schedules, photographic evidence of structural problems at his other sites. By dawn, Kate had created a document that could end Blackwood's career if it reached the right people. But releasing it would also end her own anonymity and expose her to the same character assassination that had driven her into hiding. As the sun rose over Millbrook, Kate Wells faced the same choice that had defined her life 6 years ago: remain silent and complicit, or speak the truth regardless of personal cost. This time, she knew what she had to do. The Millbrook Town Council chambers had never seen a crowd like the one that gathered on Tuesday evening. Word of a special presentation regarding the development project had spread through the community faster than gossip at the beauty salon. Kate arrived early, her comprehensive report printed and bound in professional folders, 47 copies for council members, media representatives, and key community leaders. She'd spent the previous day reaching out to every contact she could remember from her former professional life. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a geotechnical engineer she'd worked with on projects before Brighton Harbor, had agreed to review Kate's findings remotely. Professor James Chen from the university's civil engineering department had confirmed her soil analysis calculations. Most importantly, investigative journalist Maria Santos, who specialized in construction industry fraud, had expressed serious interest in the broader pattern Kate had uncovered. Tom Bradley met her at the chamber's entrance, his weathered face showing a mixture of determination and nervousness. "You sure about this? Once we start down this road, there's no going back." "I'm sure," Kate replied, though her stomach churned with anxiety. "The people of this town deserve the truth, even if it means revealing your own background." Kate looked around at the familiar faces filing into the chambers: Mrs. Henderson with her grandson Tommy, young families who'd saved for years to buy homes in the new development, elderly residents hoping the community center would provide activities for their golden years. "Especially then," she said quietly. Mayor Morrison called the meeting to order with visible confusion. The agenda had been changed at the last minute, and he clearly hadn't expected such attendance for what was supposed to be a routine council session. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bradley said, standing to address the packed room, "I've asked for this time to present serious concerns about the proposed development project. These concerns were brought to my attention by a resident whose technical expertise has proven invaluable in identifying potential safety issues." A murmur rippled through the audience. In the third row, Kate spotted Robert Blackwood, his expression unreadable, but his posture tense. Their eyes met briefly, and his slight smile promised swift retaliation. "I'd like to introduce Kate Wells," Bradley continued, "who will explain her findings regarding the geological and structural aspects of the proposed construction." Kate rose on unsteady legs, her folder of evidence clutched in sweating palms. The walk to the podium felt endless, every step echoing in the hushed chamber. She had spoken at countless conferences during her professional career, but this felt different, more personal, more consequential. "Good evening," she began, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "My name is Kate Wells, and I work at the Millbrook Public Library. For the past several days, I've been reviewing the technical specifications for the proposed development project, and I've identified serious concerns that I believe warrant your attention." She began with the basics: soil composition, drainage patterns, foundation requirements. Her explanation was clear and accessible, using analogies that made complex engineering concepts understandable to lay audiences. As she spoke, she noticed council members leaning forward with interest, while Blackwood's expression grew increasingly dark. "The geological survey provided by Blackwood Development," Kate continued, "shows bore samples from only 3 locations across the entire 17-acre site. Industry standard for this type of construction would require at least 12 samples, with additional testing in areas designated for heavy structural loads." Councilwoman Janet Pierce raised her hand. "Ms. Wells, forgive me, but how do you know what industry standards require? This seems quite technical for a librarian?" Kate smiled grimly. "You're right to question my qualifications. I should have been more forthcoming about my background." The chamber fell silent. Kate felt the weight of dozens of gazes, knowing that her next words would change everything. "My name is Kate Elena Wells. I hold a doctorate in structural engineering from MIT and am a licensed architect in 12 states. Before coming to Millbrook 6 years ago, I designed some of the most innovative sustainable buildings in North America." The silence exploded into shocked conversation. Mrs. Henderson's mouth fell open. Tommy stared at the woman who'd helped him with homework as if seeing her for the first time. Even Bradley looked stunned by the completeness of her revelation. Mayor Morrison banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order! Ms. Wells, why didn't you disclose this background when you first raised concerns?" Kate's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the podium. "Because 6 years ago, my career was destroyed by the same man who's asking you to trust him with your community's future." She turned to face Blackwood directly. "Mr. Blackwood was the construction manager on a project I designed in Brighton Harbor. When that building experienced structural problems, I was blamed for design flaws that were actually caused by his cost-cutting measures. He substituted substandard materials, reduced foundation specifications, and ignored environmental assessments, then used his political connections to make me the scapegoat when the building began to fail." Blackwood shot to his feet. "These are serious accusations, Ms. Wells. Do you have any proof of these claims?" "I do." Kate opened her folder with steady hands. "Counselors, you each have a copy of my complete analysis. Page 15 shows photographic evidence from 3 of Mr. Blackwood's recent projects, all showing structural failures consistent with the same cost-cutting practices I've identified in the Millbrook plans." The room erupted as council members flipped to the reference pages. Kate heard gasps and muttered exclamations as they saw images of cracked foundations, buckled floors, and condemned buildings. "Page 23, Kate continued, her voice cutting through the noise, "contains financial records showing Mr. Blackwood's profit margins on projects where these failures occurred. He consistently underbids competing contractors by 15 to 20%, savings achieved by cutting corners on materials and engineering specifications." Blackwood's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This is character assassination based on the ravings of a disgraced professional. Ms. Wells was found liable for design failures that injured 3 people. I was never found liable, Kate replied calmly. The civil lawsuit was settled out of court with no admission of wrongdoing. The Engineering Review Board investigation was closed due to lack of evidence. Evidence that was suppressed by the same legal team that represented your company. Dr. Sarah Martinez's voice came through Kate's phone speaker as she activated the conference call feature. If I may interrupt, this is Dr. Sarah Martinez, licensed geotechnical engineer and professor at Columbia University. I've reviewed Ms. Wells's analysis of the Millbrook soil conditions remotely, and her conclusions are absolutely correct. The proposed foundation systems are inadequate for the documented geological conditions. Professor Chen's voice joined the call. James Chen, University of Connecticut Civil Engineering Department. The structural calculations in Ms. Wells's report are flawless. More importantly, the pattern of cost-cutting she's identified represents a clear danger to public safety. The momentum in the room had shifted dramatically. Council members were studying the evidence with growing alarm, while residents whispered anxiously among themselves. Blackwood looked like a man watching his empire crumble in real time. Furthermore, Kate continued, I've been in contact with investigative journalist Maria Santos, who specializes in construction industry fraud. She's confirmed that similar patterns of corner cutting and subsequent failures have occurred at 12 other Blackwood development projects across 6 states. Blackwood's lawyer, a thin man in an expensive suit who'd been sitting quietly in the back, suddenly spoke up. My client demands an immediate recess to review these allegations privately with the council. Denied, Mayor Morrison replied firmly. Ms. Wells, please continue. Kate felt a surge of confidence as she realized the tide had turned. The most critical issue is timeline. Mr. Blackwood is promising completion dates that are physically impossible without compromising safety protocols. The community center alone requires a 14-month construction period for proper foundation curing and structural installation. His timeline allows for 8 months. Tommy Henderson raised his hand tentatively. Ms. Wells? Dr. Wells? Does this mean the new buildings would be dangerous? Kate's heart ached at the innocence in his question. Tommy, if these buildings are constructed according to Mr. Blackwood's current plans, they could experience serious structural problems within a few years. The community center's gymnasium floor might crack or buckle. The residential buildings could develop foundation settlement that makes them uninhabitable. Mrs. Henderson stood up, her usual gentle demeanor replaced by protective fury. Mr. Blackwood, did you know about these problems when you made your presentation to us? Blackwood's composure finally cracked. This entire proceeding is a sham. Ms. Wells is a failed architect with an obvious grudge against my company. Her so-called evidence is fabricated. The evidence can be independently verified, Kate replied steadily. Every photograph, every financial record, every engineering calculation. I invite the council to hire independent consultants to review my findings. Councilman Robert Hayes looked up from his copy of the report. Ms. Wells, assuming your analysis is correct, what would proper construction of this project require? Additional geological testing, revised foundation specifications, extended construction timelines, and probably a 20 to 30% increase in project costs, Kate replied. But the result would be buildings that serve this community safely for decades. And if we proceed with Mr. Blackwood's current plans? Kate thought about the families who would invest their savings in homes built on inadequate foundations, about the children who would play in a community center designed to fail. Then we're gambling with people's lives and financial security. When these buildings start failing, and they will, the costs to the community will be far greater than any savings achieved during construction. Mayor Morrison looked around the chamber, noting the transformed mood of the audience. Where earlier there had been excitement about the development, now there was concern and growing anger. "Mr. Blackwood," the mayor said formally, "how do you respond to these specific technical concerns?" Blackwood stood slowly, his earlier confidence completely gone. "These allegations are unexpected. Obviously, we'll need time to review the supposed evidence and prepare a detailed response. I suggest we adjourn this meeting and reconvene when all parties have had adequate time to—" "No," interrupted Janet Pierce. "The concerns Dr. Wells has raised are too serious to postpone. Mr. Blackwood, are you prepared to address the specific technical issues she's identified or not?" The silence stretched uncomfortably as Blackwood realized he had no technical defense. His business model had always relied on political connections and legal maneuvering rather than engineering excellence. Faced with detailed technical analysis from someone who understood his methods, he was exposed as fundamentally incompetent. "I will need to consult with our engineering team," he said finally. "That's not an answer," Tom Bradley interjected. "Dr. Wells has presented specific, documentable concerns about public safety. As the building inspector for this community, I'm formally recommending that we halt approval proceedings until these issues are independently investigated." The council voted unanimously to suspend approval of Blackwood's project pending a comprehensive third-party review. As the meeting adjourned, residents surrounded Kate with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. Mrs. Henderson hugged her tightly, whispering, "Thank you for protecting us." But Kate's victory felt hollow as she watched Blackwood storm out of the chambers, his face promising swift and brutal retaliation. She had won this battle by revealing her true identity, but she knew the war was far from over. Outside in the parking lot, her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice was chillingly familiar. "Very impressive performance, Kate," Blackwood said. "You always were good at making speeches. Too bad you're about to learn that some enemies never forget." The line went dead, leaving Kate standing alone under the streetlights, wondering what price she would pay for finally telling the truth. The story broke at 6 a.m. the next morning on the front page of the Hartford Courant. "Disgraced architect emerges from hiding to sabotage development project." The article was a masterpiece of character assassination, carefully blending true facts with damaging implications to paint Kate as an unstable professional whose career had ended in disgrace. Kate read it online while sitting in her kitchen, coffee growing cold as she absorbed the full scope of Blackwood's counterattack. The piece quoted unnamed sources describing her as obsessed with the Brighton Harbor incident and unable to accept responsibility for her professional failures. It suggested that her opposition to the Millbrook project was motivated by personal vendetta rather than legitimate safety concerns. Worse yet, the article included quotes from former colleagues who claimed they'd always had concerns about her judgment. Kate recognized some of the names, people she'd considered friends who had apparently been willing to provide damaging statements in exchange for Blackwood's influence or financial incentives. Her phone began ringing at 6:15 a.m. The first call was from a Hartford television station requesting an interview. The second was from a blogger who specialized in exposing professional frauds. By 7 a.m., she'd received 12 calls from media outlets, 3 from architectural firms rescinding speaking invitations she'd accepted years ago, and 1 from the Millbrook Library Board requesting an emergency meeting. Kate turned off her phone and walked to work in a daze. The streets of Millbrook felt different now. She was no longer invisible, no longer protected by anonymity. Several residents stared as she passed, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern to outright suspicion. The library was quiet when she arrived, but that changed rapidly as the morning progressed. Mrs. Henderson appeared at the circulation desk at 9 a.m., her face showing the strain of someone who'd spent the night worrying, Kate, dear, she said hesitantly, I've been reading some disturbing things in the newspaper this morning. I wanted you to know that Tommy and I still trust you completely, but some people are asking questions. What kind of questions? Kate asked, though she dreaded the answer. Whether you've been honest with us about your background, whether someone with your history should be working with children and families. Mrs. Henderson's voice dropped to a whisper. Eleanor Fitzpatrick from the library board has been calling people all morning. She's saying there will be an emergency vote tonight about your employment. Kate felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in around her. 6 years of careful relationship building, of earning trust and respect through daily acts of service, was being dismantled by a few hours of orchestrated character assassination. Mrs. Henderson, she said carefully, everything I told the council last night was true. The safety concerns about those buildings are real, regardless of my personal history. I believe you, the older woman replied, but others are scared. They're saying if you lied about your background, maybe you're lying about other things too. The morning brought a steady stream of uncomfortable interactions. Some patrons offered support, but others seemed nervous around her. 3 library volunteers called in sick, leaving Kate to handle the increased workload alone. By noon, she realized that Blackwood's strategy was working perfectly. He was isolating her by making her toxic to the community she'd tried to protect. At 1 p.m., Mayor Morrison appeared at the library, his expression grim. Kate, we need to talk. They met in the small conference room behind the reference section, away from curious patrons. Morrison looked like a man under tremendous pressure, his usual political composure strained by forces beyond his control. I've been fielding calls all morning, he began without preamble. Reporters, state officials, investors threatening to pull funding from other municipal projects. This situation is becoming a serious problem for the town. The serious problem is Robert Blackwood's plan to build unsafe structures in our community, Kate replied. Nothing else should matter compared to that. Morrison rubbed his forehead wearily. I wish it were that simple, but politics is about perception as much as reality. Right now, the perception is that a disgraced professional with personal grievances is trying to sabotage a legitimate development project. Have you read my technical report? Have you looked at the evidence I presented? I have, Morrison admitted. And honestly, it's concerning. But Blackwood's team has hired their own experts who are preparing a point-by-point rebuttal. They're claiming your analysis is biased and that your conclusions are based on incomplete information. Kate felt a surge of frustrated anger. Tom, those experts are on Blackwood's payroll. They'll say whatever he wants them to say. Maybe. But they have impressive credentials and no obvious conflicts of interest. Unlike... Morrison paused, clearly uncomfortable. Unlike me, Kate finished. A woman with a grudge and a history of professional failure. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Kate stood up, pacing the small room. This is exactly what happened 6 years ago. Blackwood orchestrates a character assassination campaign that makes the messenger irrelevant to the message. People stop focusing on the evidence and start focusing on who's presenting it. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Kate, I like you. You've been a tremendous asset to this community, but I have to think about what's best for Millbrook as a whole. If this controversy continues, it could damage our reputation with other developers, hurt our economic prospects, drive away businesses that are considering relocating here. And if Blackwood's buildings collapse in 5 years, what happens to Millbrook's reputation then? That's a risk we'll have to evaluate when we get the independent engineering assessment. But right now, the immediate problem is the media circus that's developing around your involvement. Kate understood what he was really saying. She had become a liability. someone whose past made her advocacy dangerous to the political process, regardless of how correct her technical analysis might be. What are you asking me to do, Tom? Morrison looked genuinely pained. I'm asking you to consider stepping back from this issue. Let the independent engineers do their work without the distraction of personal controversy. Maybe take some time away from town until things settle down. You want me to disappear again? I want this community to be able to evaluate Blackwood's project based on technical merits rather than personal conflicts. Kate stared out the conference room window at the construction site across the street. Workers were already mobilizing equipment, preparing to begin site preparation, despite the council's suspension of approval. Blackwood was gambling that political pressure would force the town to reverse its decision. Tom, if I step back now, Blackwood wins. The technical evidence gets buried under legal proceedings and expert battles, and those buildings get built exactly as he planned. People get hurt, and nobody remembers the woman who tried to warn them. And if you stay involved, your past becomes the story. Every news report, every expert opinion, every council discussion gets filtered through questions about your credibility and motivations. It was an impossible situation, and Kate realized that Blackwood had planned it perfectly. By revealing her identity to protect the community, she had made herself too controversial to be an effective advocate for that same community. That evening, the library board meeting was packed beyond capacity. Kate sat in the front row, surrounded by supporters and detractors in roughly equal numbers. Eleanor Fitzpatrick, the board's chairwoman, called the session to order with obvious reluctance. We're here tonight to address concerns that have been raised about Ms. Wells's employment with the library, Fitzpatrick announced. Specifically, questions about whether she was forthcoming about her professional background during the hiring process. The discussion that followed was painful and surreal. Kate listened as her 6 years of dedicated service were weighed against her failure to disclose her architectural credentials during the initial job interview. Board members who had praised her work enthusiastically just weeks earlier now spoke cautiously about trust issues and community standards. Dr. Rachel Moore, a retired professor who served on the board, finally cut through the political maneuvering. Eleanor, this is ridiculous. Kate didn't lie about her background. She simply didn't volunteer information that wasn't relevant to her library duties. More importantly, she's proven herself to be an exemplary employee who went above and beyond to serve this community. But the question remains, Fitzpatrick replied, whether someone who's been involved in high-profile professional controversies should be working in a position of public trust. The controversy was manufactured by the same man who's now trying to destroy her again. Dr. Moore shot back. We're punishing the victim instead of the perpetrator. The debate continued for 2 hours. In the end, the board voted 4-3 to place Kate on administrative leave pending a thorough review of her employment status. It was a political compromise that satisfied no one. Kate remained technically employed, but was effectively barred from working. As the meeting adjourned, Tom Bradley approached her in the parking lot. His weathered face showed deep concern and barely contained anger. This is exactly what Blackwood wanted, he said grimly. Divide the community, make you the issue instead of the building safety problems. Classic political maneuvering. I know, Kate replied wearily. The question is, what do we do now? Bradley looked toward the construction site, where floodlights illuminated round-the-clock preparation work. We keep fighting. With or without you, the technical problems you identified are real. I'm not approving any building permits until those issues are addressed. Tom, Blackwood will go after you next. Once he's neutralized me, you're the only obstacle left. Let him try, Bradley said with grim determination. I've been building in this town for 30 years. My reputation is solid, and I don't have any dark secrets for him to exploit. Kate wished she shared his confidence. But she'd seen how effectively Blackwood could destroy even the most solid reputations when the stakes were high enough. As she drove home to her apartment, Kate realized that the battle for Millbrook's future had entered a new phase. She was no longer a hidden asset fighting from the shadows. She was a known quantity, exposed and vulnerable. But perhaps that exposure could become a strength if she chose to use it wisely. That night, she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of retreating into anonymity again, she would take the fight directly to Blackwood using weapons he hadn't expected: transparency, documentation, and the power of professional networks he couldn't control. The war was far from over, and Kate Wells was done hiding. Kate spent the next morning reaching out to contacts she hadn't spoken to in years. Her professional address book, carefully maintained despite her exile, contained hundreds of names: architects, engineers, journalists, and academics who specialized in construction industry oversight. The responses varied dramatically. Some colleagues remained supportive, expressing outrage at Blackwood's tactics and offering assistance. Others were cautious, clearly worried about associating with someone involved in public controversy. A few were openly hostile, suggesting that her emergence from hiding proved she was unstable and vindictive. But by noon, Kate had assembled a formidable team of allies willing to support her fight against Blackwood's corner-cutting practices. Dr. Sarah Martinez called first. "Kate, I've been researching Blackwood development since our conference call last night. What I've found is disturbing. This pattern of structural failures goes back almost 15 years, with increasingly sophisticated cover-up strategies." "How sophisticated?" Kate asked. "Shell companies, liability transfers, strategic bankruptcies that shield personal assets while leaving victims without recourse. He's built an entire business model around cutting construction costs and then using legal maneuvering to avoid responsibility for the consequences." Professor James Chen joined the call from Connecticut. "I've been analyzing the soil reports from Blackwood's other projects, and the pattern is clear. He consistently ignores geological conditions that require expensive foundation solutions, then blames structural problems on unforeseeable soil conditions that supposedly couldn't have been predicted." "Can we prove systematic fraud?" Kate asked. "With enough documentation, absolutely," Chen replied. "But we'll need access to internal company records, employee testimony, and detailed analysis of multiple project sites." "I might be able to help with that," interrupted a new voice on the conference call. Maria Santos, the investigative journalist, had been quietly researching Blackwood for months as part of a broader investigation into construction industry fraud. "Maria, what do you have?" Kate asked. "Enough to end his career, if we can get it into the right hands. 3 former employees willing to testify about systematic corner cutting. Financial records showing how cost savings are achieved. Most importantly, internal communications proving that Blackwood personally approves structural modifications that violate building codes." Kate felt hope stirring for the first time in days. "What do you need from me?" "Your technical expertise to interpret the engineering evidence and your willingness to go public as a named source. My editors won't run the story based solely on anonymous whistleblowers." "I'm already public," Kate replied grimly. "Blackwood made sure of that yesterday." "Good. Then we can coordinate our efforts. I publish the exposé about his business practices while you present the technical evidence to the Millbrook authorities. 2 fronts attacking simultaneously." The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to Kate's apartment. Dr. Rebecca Foster, the dean of MIT's architecture school and Kate's former dissertation advisor, appeared at her door carrying a briefcase and wearing the determined expression Kate remembered from their graduate school days. "Rebecca?" Kate stared in shock. "What are you doing here?" "Cleaning up a mess that should have been dealt with 6 years ago," Foster replied briskly. "May I come in?" Dr. Foster was in her 60s, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She'd built her reputation by defending innovative architecture against conservative critics, and she'd never forgotten the promising student whose career had been destroyed by political maneuvering. "I've been following your situation with interest," Foster said, settling into Kate's reading chair. "Partly professional curiosity, partly personal guilt for not fighting harder when you were railroaded 6 years ago." "You couldn't have changed anything," Kate protested. "Blackwood's connections were too strong." "Perhaps not then, but the situation is different now. He's made enemies, overextended his influence, and most importantly, he's underestimated the power of professional networks to protect their own." Foster opened her briefcase and extracted a thick folder. The American Institute of Architects has been investigating Blackwood development for 8 months, initially based on complaints from member firms about unfair bidding practices. "Your emergence has given us new evidence and a credible witness willing to testify about his methods." Kate flipped through the folder, her excitement building as she recognized the scope of the investigation. "This is comprehensive. How did you gather all this information?" "Professional organizations have resources that individual architects don't," Foster explained. "We can access project records, compare bidding practices, interview industry professionals without fear of legal retaliation. Most importantly, we can provide institutional credibility that individual accusations lack." "What are you proposing?" "Joint action. The AIA will file formal complaints with state licensing boards in 12 states where Blackwood operates. Simultaneously, the Society of Professional Engineers will challenge his firm's technical practices. The American Society of Civil Engineers will review the projects where structural failures occurred." Kate felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Foster was suggesting. This would be a coordinated assault on his entire business model. Exactly. He can destroy individual careers through character assassination, but he can't silence entire professional organizations. When institutional voices start questioning his practices, media attention and regulatory scrutiny follow inevitably. "What do you need from me?" Foster's smile was sharp as a blade. "Your expertise, your documentation, and your willingness to testify before professional review boards. But most importantly, we need you to hold the line in Millbrook until the broader case can be developed." The town council suspended approval of his project, but he's pressuring them to reverse that decision. "I'm not sure how long they'll resist." "Then we need to give them reasons to maintain their resistance. Technical evidence they can't ignore, professional opinions they can't dismiss, and media attention that makes reversing course politically impossible." That evening, Kate found herself in an unlikely alliance with Tom Bradley, planning strategy in his small office at the town hall. Bradley had spent the day fending off pressure from the mayor, council members, and several local business leaders who were growing nervous about the controversy surrounding the development project. 3 council members are wavering, Bradley reported. They're worried about the economic impact of delaying or canceling the project. Blackwood's team has been very effective in suggesting that rejecting their proposal will scare away other developers. "Do they understand the liability issues if we approve buildings that later fail structurally?" Kate asked. "I've tried to explain it, but it's abstract to them. They see immediate economic benefits versus theoretical future problems." Kate spread her laptop screen to show Bradley the preliminary findings from Dr. Foster's investigation. "Tom, look at this data. Blackwood's projects fail at a rate 3 times higher than industry average. The liability exposure isn't theoretical, it's inevitable." Bradley studied the statistics with growing alarm. Jesus, if even half of these failure rates applied to the Millbrook project, the town could face millions in damages, lawsuits from injured residents, and condemnation of buildings that families invested their life savings to purchase. We need to present this to the council immediately. Agreed. But we also need to anticipate Blackwood's counterattack. He'll claim the data is biased, question the methodology, and present his own experts to contradict our findings. Bradley leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. Kate, I've been building in this town for 3 decades. I've never faced anything like this, where technical expertise gets overshadowed by politics and personal attacks. Welcome to my world, Kate replied grimly. This is exactly what happened at Brighton Harbor. Clear technical evidence gets buried under character assassination and legal maneuvering. How do we prevent that from happening here? Kate thought about the allies she'd assembled, the institutional support Dr. Foster had promised, and the media investigation Maria Santos was developing. We fight on multiple fronts simultaneously. Make it impossible for him to control the narrative by creating too many sources of information for him to suppress. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Public meeting tomorrow at 7 p.m. Town will vote on project approval. Last chance to withdraw your opposition gracefully. RB. Kate showed the message to Bradley, who whistled softly. He's forcing a confrontation. Good, Kate replied with more confidence than she felt. I'm tired of fighting from a defensive position. Tomorrow night, we take the offensive. As she drove home through Millbrook's quiet streets, Kate realized that the next 24 hours would determine not just the fate of Blackwood's project, but the future of her adopted community. The technical evidence was clear, the professional support was strong, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Tomorrow night, 6 years of hiding would culminate in a public confrontation that would either vindicate her expertise or destroy her completely. But for the first time since Blackwood had walked back into her life, Kate felt ready for the battle ahead. The truth, properly supported and professionally presented, was a powerful weapon. She was about to find out if it was powerful enough to defeat a man who had built his empire on lies. The Millbrook High School auditorium had never held a crowd like the one that gathered on Wednesday evening. Every seat was filled, with additional residents standing along the walls and crowding the aisles. Local media crews competed for position, while out-of-state reporters filed stories about the small-town battle that had attracted national attention. Kate arrived early, accompanied by an impressive entourage. Dr. Rebecca Foster sat to her right, lending institutional credibility to the proceedings. Professor Chen joined them via video conference, his expertise available for real-time consultation. Tom Bradley positioned himself near the front, his weathered face showing the determination of someone defending his life's work. Blackwood entered like a general preparing for war, flanked by lawyers, engineers, and public relations specialists. He'd clearly invested significant resources in this final confrontation, understanding that losing in Millbrook could trigger the cascade of professional investigations that would destroy his empire. Mayor Morrison called the special session to order, his voice strained by the pressure of the past week. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here tonight to make a final decision about the proposed development project. Both sides will present their evidence, after which the council will vote on whether to approve, modify, or reject the proposal. Blackwood spoke first, his presentation polished and professional. He addressed Kate's concerns directly, presenting what appeared to be comprehensive rebuttals supported by impressive credentials and sophisticated graphics. His engineers explained how additional soil testing had confirmed the adequacy of proposed foundation systems. His financial analysts demonstrated the economic benefits the project would bring to Millbrook. The concerns raised by Ms. Wells, Blackwood concluded, reflect the perspective of someone whose career was damaged by professional failures. While we respect her dedication to this community, we cannot allow personal grievances to prevent progress that will benefit thousands of residents. The presentation was masterful, technically sophisticated enough to sound credible, emotionally appealing in its vision of Millbrook's bright future, and subtly damaging in its implications about Kate's motivations. Kate rose to respond, feeling the weight of hundreds of gazes and the pressure of knowing that her community's safety depended on her ability to make technical concepts compelling to lay audiences. Mr. Blackwood is correct about one thing, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. My career was indeed damaged by professional failures, but those failures weren't mine. They were his. She activated her laptop, projecting the first slide onto the large screen behind the podium. 6 years ago, I designed a residential tower in Brighton Harbor using specifications that met or exceeded all applicable building codes. Mr. Blackwood was the construction manager who substituted Grade B concrete for the Grade A specified in my plans, reduced foundation depths to save costs, and ignored environmental assessments that I had specifically included. The slide showed side-by-side photographs. The concrete delivery receipts Kate had specified versus the invoices for materials actually used. The difference was stark and undeniable. When the building began experiencing structural problems, Mr. Blackwood's legal team fabricated evidence to blame the design rather than the construction. They suppressed documentation of material substitutions, destroyed quality control records, and coached witnesses to provide false testimony about my alleged negligence. Dr. Foster stood to address the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Rebecca Foster, Dean of Architecture at MIT and former president of the American Institute of Architects. The AIA has completed an 8-month investigation into Blackwood Development's practices, and our findings support everything Dr. Wells has presented tonight. The institutional endorsement carried weight that individual testimony couldn't match. Murmurs rippled through the audience as Foster continued. Mr. Blackwood's company has been involved in structural failures at 14 projects over the past decade. In each case, the same pattern emerges: aggressive cost-cutting during construction, followed by legal maneuvering to avoid responsibility for the consequences. Blackwood's lead attorney stood up. Objection. These are unsubstantiated allegations being presented without proper legal context. This isn't a courtroom, Mayor Morrison replied firmly. Dr. Foster, please continue. The technical evidence is overwhelming, Foster continued, advancing to the next slide. Systematic use of substandard materials, foundation systems inappropriate for documented soil conditions, and construction timelines that require dangerous shortcuts. Kate resumed her presentation, focusing on the specific problems with Blackwood's Millbrook proposal. But this time, her analysis was supported by independent experts appearing via video conference from across the country. Dr. Maria Santos joined remotely from Hartford, where she'd spent the day interviewing former Blackwood employees. 3 engineers who formerly worked for Blackwood Development have provided sworn statements describing company policies that prioritized cost reduction over safety compliance. These statements, combined with internal documents obtained through legal discovery, paint a picture of systematic fraud. The most dramatic moment came when Kate presented what she called the failure timeline, a detailed analysis showing how Blackwood's cost-cutting measures would manifest as structural problems over time. Year 1, minor settling and cosmetic cracking that will be dismissed as normal construction movement. Year 2, door and window frames beginning to distort as foundation settlement accelerates. Year 3, serious structural cracks appearing in load-bearing walls. Year 4, emergency evacuation as buildings become uninhabitable. The auditorium fell silent as residents contemplated the implications for their families and their investments. Tommy Henderson raised his hand from the audience. Dr. Wells, if these buildings are so dangerous, why would anyone build them? Kate's heart ached at the innocence in his question. Tommy, because cutting these corners increases profit margins by 15 to 20%. For a multi-million-dollar project, that represents enormous financial incentives. But people could get hurt. Yes, Kate replied simply. People could get hurt. Blackwood rose for his rebuttal, but his composure had cracked. The systematic presentation of evidence from multiple credible sources had overwhelmed his ability to control the narrative through charm and political connections. These attacks on my company's integrity are motivated by professional jealousy and personal vendetta, he declared, his voice rising. Ms. Wells has spent 6 years plotting this sabotage, waiting for an opportunity to revenge herself against the success she couldn't achieve legitimately. The accusation backfired spectacularly. Kate's calm professionalism had contrasted sharply with Blackwood's increasingly desperate rhetoric, and his personal attack only reinforced the impression that he was losing the technical argument. Dr. Foster stood again, her academic authority cutting through Blackwood's bluster. Mr. Blackwood, the evidence presented tonight isn't personal opinion. It's documented fact supported by multiple independent sources. If you have technical rebuttals to the specific engineering concerns that have been raised, please present them. Otherwise, this community deserves better than character assassination. Blackwood's engineers attempted to respond, but their explanations seemed thin and defensive compared to the comprehensive documentation Kate's team had presented. They couldn't explain away the pattern of failures at other projects, couldn't justify the aggressive construction timeline, and couldn't address the fundamental geological problems Kate had identified. As the presentations concluded, Mayor Morrison asked for public comment. What followed was the most remarkable hour in Millbrook's political history. Mrs. Henderson spoke first, her voice quavering but determined. 6 years ago, Kate came to our town as a stranger who needed a fresh start. She's never asked for special treatment or recognition. She's helped our children with homework, organized community programs, and served this town with quiet dedication. If she says these buildings are dangerous, I believe her. Tom Bradley's testimony was devastatingly technical. As the town's building inspector, he detailed every corner that Blackwood had attempted to cut, every safety standard that would be compromised, and every regulation that would be violated by the proposed construction methods. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a structural engineering professor from Yale, had driven to Millbrook specifically to speak at the meeting. I've reviewed Dr. Wells's analysis of this project, Warren announced, and I can confirm that her conclusions are technically sound and professionally responsible. More importantly, I've researched Mr. Blackwood's other projects, and the pattern of structural failures is unconscionable. Any community that approves construction by Blackwood Development is gambling with the safety and financial security of its residents. The vote, when it finally came, was unanimous. The Millbrook Town Council rejected Blackwood's proposal by a margin of 7-0, citing unacceptable safety risks and inadequate technical documentation. Blackwood stormed out of the auditorium without comment, his legal team scrambling to follow. But his departure felt anticlimactic compared to the quiet satisfaction of a community that had chosen safety over expedience, technical expertise over political pressure. As the crowd dispersed, Kate found herself surrounded by neighbors who had become friends, colleagues who had traveled hundreds of miles to support her, and students who were learning that standing up for the truth sometimes required extraordinary courage. Dr. Wells, Tommy Henderson approached with his grandmother. Does this mean our town is safe now? Kate smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. It means we made the right choice, Tommy. Sometimes that's the best any of us can do. 3 months later, Maria Santos's exposé on Blackwood development appeared in the Hartford Courant, triggering investigations in 6 states and the eventual collapse of his construction empire. The FBI raided Blackwood's offices, seizing documents that would lead to criminal charges for fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. His network of corrupt officials and complicit professionals began unraveling as investigators followed the paper trail of payoffs and falsified reports. Kate stood in the Millbrook Library on a crisp January morning, arranging displays for the new community education series she'd helped develop. The library board had not only reinstated her position, but had also created a new role, Community Technical Liaison, recognizing the value of having someone who could help residents understand complex issues that affected their daily lives. The morning brought familiar routines, but everything felt different now. Patrons approached her not with the polite distance reserved for service workers, but with the genuine respect accorded to someone who had proven herself when it mattered most. Children who had once known her only as the lady who helped with homework now saw her as the woman who had protected their community. Mrs. Henderson arrived at her usual time, but instead of settling into her chair with newspapers, she approached the circulation desk with obvious excitement. "Kate, dear, have you seen this morning's paper?" She spread the Millbrook Gazette across the counter, pointing to the headline, "Millbrook Selected for Sustainable Development Grant Program." Kate read the article with growing amazement. The state had awarded Millbrook a $3 million grant to develop a model sustainable community center, specifically citing the town's commitment to technical excellence and community safety over short-term financial considerations. "They want you to consult on the project," Mrs. Henderson continued, beaming with pride. "The article mentions your expertise in sustainable design and your dedication to community service." Through the library's tall windows, Kate could see the vacant lot where Blackwood had planned his dangerous development. The site would soon host a new kind of construction project, one designed to serve the community for generations rather than maximize short-term profits. Dr. Foster called that afternoon with news that completed Kate's vindication. "The Brighton Harbor case has been reopened," she announced. With Blackwood facing criminal charges, his former associates are providing testimony about the evidence suppression that destroyed your career. The Engineering Review Board wants to meet with you next month about clearing your professional record. "After all this time, does it still matter?" Kate asked. "It matters because the truth matters," Foster replied. "But more importantly, it opens the door for you to practice architecture again if you choose. Several firms have already expressed interest in hiring someone with your combination of technical expertise and proven integrity." That evening, Kate walked through downtown Millbrook, noting the subtle changes that had occurred since the confrontation with Blackwood. New businesses were opening, attracted by the town's reputation for thoughtful development practices. Young families were moving in, drawn by a community that prioritized long-term thinking over quick profits. She paused at the construction site, where preliminary work had begun on the new community center. The foundation specifications were conservative but appropriate for local soil conditions. The timeline was realistic, allowing for proper construction practices. Most importantly, the design prioritized functionality and safety over flashy aesthetics that might hide structural compromises. Tom Bradley joined her at the fence surrounding the construction area. His building inspector's experienced eye was already evaluating the early work with obvious satisfaction. "Good to see proper foundation work for a change," he commented. "Deep pilings, adequate drainage, soil conditions properly addressed. This building will be standing strong 50 years from now." "That's the idea," Kate replied, studying the architectural plans posted on the construction trailer. "Buildings should serve the people who use them, not the bank accounts of the people who build them." "You know," Bradley said thoughtfully, "the state has asked me to help develop new standards for local building inspection programs. They want to use what happened here as a case study for other communities. Would you be interested in helping with that? Kate considered the offer. 6 months ago, she had been a librarian trying to remain invisible. Now she was being asked to help shape construction standards that could protect communities across the region. "I'd be honored to help," she said. As winter gave way to spring, Kate found herself consulting on development projects throughout New England. Her expertise was sought not only for technical knowledge, but for her understanding of how communities could protect themselves from predatory development practices. The woman who had once been silenced by political pressure had become a voice for responsible construction standards. The Blackwood criminal trial provided a dramatic conclusion to the saga that had consumed her life for nearly 7 years. Kate testified for 3 days, describing the systematic fraud that had destroyed her career and endangered countless families. Her testimony was devastating, technically precise, emotionally compelling, and completely credible. Blackwood was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to victims of his fraudulent practices. More importantly, his conviction sent a message throughout the construction industry that cutting corners on safety would no longer be tolerated. On a warm Saturday morning in June, Kate stood before a crowd gathered for the groundbreaking ceremony of Millbrook's new community center. As the project's lead consulting architect, she had the honor of turning the first shovel of earth for a building designed to serve the community safely and efficiently for decades to come. Mayor Morrison, who had weathered his own political challenges during the Blackwood controversy, introduced Kate with words that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "Dr. Kate Wells has shown us that expertise combined with integrity can overcome any obstacle. Thanks to her courage in speaking truth to power, Millbrook will soon have a community center we can be proud of, one built on solid foundations both literally and figuratively." The applause was thunderous, but Kate felt most moved by the faces in the crowd. Tommy Henderson, now a high school sophomore who had expressed interest in studying engineering. Mrs. Henderson, whose faith in Kate had never wavered even during the darkest moments. Tom Bradley, whose own integrity had been vindicated along with Kate's. Dozens of neighbors who had learned that technical expertise wasn't an abstract concept, but a crucial protection for their families and their community. As she spoke to the gathered crowd, Kate reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 years of hiding had taught her humility and the value of quiet service. The confrontation with Blackwood had restored her confidence and reminded her that expertise carried responsibilities that couldn't be abandoned when convenient. "This building represents more than bricks and mortar," she told the audience. "It represents our commitment to making decisions based on evidence rather than expedience, to prioritizing long-term value over short-term gain, and to protecting the people who will use these spaces for generations to come." The ceremony concluded with children from the local elementary school burying a time capsule that would be opened when the community center celebrated its 50th anniversary. Among the items placed in the capsule was a copy of Kate's technical report, the document that had started the chain of events leading to Blackwood's downfall and the community's triumph. That evening, Kate sat in her apartment, no longer a hiding place, but a chosen home, working on the architectural plans for her next project. The phone rang regularly now with requests for consultation, speaking engagements, and collaboration opportunities. The woman who had once been professionally destroyed was now more in demand than ever. But the most satisfying calls were the ones from small communities facing their own battles against predatory developers. Kate had become something she'd never intended to be, a symbol of how individual expertise, properly supported and courageously applied, could protect entire communities from those who would exploit them. Dr. Foster visited in July, ostensibly to review Kate's application for reinstatement to the AIA, but actually to deliver news that completed the circle of vindication. The federal investigation has uncovered evidence that Blackwood's pattern of fraud goes back nearly 20 years, Foster reported. Dozens of projects, hundreds of victims, millions in damages. Your case at Brighton Harbor was just the tip of the iceberg. How many other professionals had their careers destroyed to cover his tracks? Kate asked. At least 6 that we've identified so far. All talented architects and engineers whose only crime was refusing to compromise on safety standards. Kate felt a familiar surge of anger at the waste of talent and the suffering of innocent people. But the anger was tempered by satisfaction that the truth had finally emerged and justice was being served. The AIA wants to do more than just reinstate your membership, Foster continued. They're creating a new award for professional integrity, architects who risk their careers to protect public safety. You'd be the first recipient. I'm honored, Kate replied. But the real heroes are the people like Tom Bradley who stood up when it mattered, and the communities like Millbrook that chose safety over expedience. As Autumn returned to Millbrook, Kate received the final vindication she'd never dared hope for. The Brighton Harbor Residents Association, representing families who had lost their homes due to Blackwood's cost-cutting, formally apologized for their role in the character assassination that had destroyed her career. We were manipulated by lawyers and experts who were secretly working for the same company that caused our problems, their letter read. Your integrity and expertise were sacrificed to protect the profits of those who had already hurt us. We are deeply sorry for our role in perpetuating this injustice. The apology meant more to Kate than any professional award or financial settlement. It represented acknowledgement from the people she had tried to protect that her intentions had been genuine and her expertise had been valid. On the anniversary of the town meeting that had changed everything, Kate stood once again in the Millbrook High School auditorium. This time, she was there to deliver a lecture on sustainable development practices to a packed audience of students, residents, and professionals from across New England. A year ago, she began, this auditorium was the site of a battle between truth and power, between expertise and politics, between long-term thinking and short-term profit. The outcome of that battle has shaped not just this community, but the way we think about development practices throughout the region. She looked out at the familiar faces in the audience, friends and neighbors who had supported her when it mattered most, young people who were learning that technical knowledge was a form of civic responsibility, professionals who were discovering that integrity was not only morally right, but professionally advantageous. The most important lesson from our experience, Kate continued, is that expertise without courage is worthless, but courage without expertise is dangerous. Real protection for our communities comes when knowledgeable people are willing to speak up, and when communities are willing to listen to uncomfortable truths rather than comfortable lies. As she concluded her presentation, Kate realized that her story had become something larger than personal vindication. It had become a template for how communities could protect themselves, how professionals could fulfill their ethical obligations, and how individual courage could overcome institutional corruption. The woman who had spent 6 years hiding from her past had not only reclaimed her future, but had helped create a better model for how expertise and community responsibility could work together. The silent librarian had found her voice, and that voice was now helping to build a safer, more honest world. Outside the auditorium, snow was beginning to fall on the construction site where Millbrook's community center was nearing completion. The building rising from the carefully prepared foundation represented everything Kate had fought for: solid engineering, responsible practices, and a structure designed to serve its community safely for generations. As she walked home through the quiet streets of the town that had become her true home, Kate Wells felt the deep satisfaction that comes from a life lived with purpose and integrity. The battle against Robert Blackwood had ended, But the work of protecting communities through technical expertise and professional courage would continue. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve, and new chances to prove that the truth, properly supported and courageously presented, remained the most powerful force for positive change in the world. The silent architect had found her voice, and she would never be silent again. 5 years later, Dr. Kate Wells stood before the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development in Geneva, delivering a keynote address on community-based approaches to safe construction practices. The Millbrook model, as it had come to be known, was being implemented in developing communities worldwide where predatory development practices threatened vulnerable populations. Her presentation concluded with a photograph of Millbrook's community center, now a bustling hub of activities where children played safely in spaces built to last for generations. In the audience sat representatives from dozens of countries who were learning that protecting communities required both technical expertise and the courage to apply it when it mattered most. The woman who had once been silenced by corruption had become a global voice for integrity in construction practices. But her greatest satisfaction still came from the quiet knowledge that Tommy Henderson and thousands of other young people were growing up in buildings designed to protect rather than exploit them. Some victories, Kate had learned, were measured not in personal vindication, but in the safety of children who would never know how close they had come to danger. The silent architect had found her voice, and that voice continued to echo in every properly built foundation, every responsibly designed structure, and every community brave enough to choose safety over shortcuts.
The battle for Millbrook had been won, but the war for honest construction practices continued around the world. And wherever it was fought, the example of one woman's courage to speak truth to power continued to inspire others to follow her lead. In a world where silence could be bought and expertise could be suppressed, Kate Wells had proven that some voices could never be permanently silenced. They could only grow stronger with time, gathering allies and building the kind of foundations that would support truth and justice for generations to come. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most, and where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.